As Donald Trump reclaims the White House in a historic comeback, many, rightly, rush to credit Elon Musk's platform X for reshaping the political landscape. But while the world's richest man basks in the Twitter sphere's glow, a more calculated power player watches from the shadows. Indeed, Peter Thiel, the man who made Zuckerberg, backed both Trump and Musk before either was considered viable and built a multi-billion-dollar fortune without ever trending on social media. In today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we share the story of how this chess prodigy became the true shadow president of American power, as we describe Peter Thiel, the secretive billionaire who will rule America. Let's talk about real power, not the kind that preens for cameras or trends on Twitter, but the sort that reshapes entire industries with a single investment. In late 2024, Peter Thiel sits atop a staggering $14.8 billion fortune, though calling it mere wealth, rather, understates the matter spectacularly. Picture a man who turned a measly $500,000 Facebook investment into billions, transforming Mark Zuckerberg from a college dropout with a dream into the titan of social media. Rather brilliant, wouldn't you say? But that's merely the appetizer in Thiel's feast of strategic mastery. The PayPal mafia don, as he's known in Silicon Valley circles, didn't stumble into success. After co-founding PayPal and orchestrating its $1.5 billion sale to eBay in 2002, he pocketed a cool $100 million. Most would have called it a day, perhaps bought a yacht or three, not Thiel. Instead, he founded Palantir Technologies, a data analytics behemoth that now holds contracts with the CIA and Department of Defense. Imagine having your company's tentacles deep within the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. That's not business, that's influence of the highest order. His venture capital firm, Founders Fund, reads like a who's who of tech unicorns, SpaceX, Airbnb, and countless others. Each investment carefully chosen, each success methodically planned. Even his book, 0 to 1, has become sacred text for aspiring tech entrepreneurs, though few grasp the full scope of its author's influence. In 2016, while Silicon Valley's elite clutched their pearls in horror, Thiel boldly backed Donald Trump, speaking at the Republican National Convention and dropping $1.25 million into the campaign coffers. By 2022, he'd poured $32 million into various political campaigns, playing kingmaker with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Yet in 2023, something shifted. Thiel announced he wouldn't financially back any 2024 presidential candidates, a curious move for someone with such deep political pockets. Was it a retreat or a tactical repositioning? In classic Thiel fashion, he maintained his support, promising to continue, quote, in every other way possible, leaving the world to wonder what exactly that meant. Through his Thiel Fellowship, he's been quietly building an army of young innovators, paying them 6 figures each to skip university and pursue their entrepreneurial dreams. It's a direct challenge to traditional education and perfectly exemplifies Thiel's approach to disruption. And his Los Angeles mansion, sprawling across 1.3 acres near the infamous Playboy Mansion, serves as just one base of operations. With 9,000 square feet of calculated luxury, including a chef's kitchen that could service a small restaurant, it's hardly the dwelling of someone who craves the spotlight. No, Thiel's taste in real estate mirrors his approach to power, impressive yet purposeful. But to truly understand how a German-born chess prodigy transformed himself into Silicon Valley's most enigmatic power broker, we need to wind back the clock. The story begins far from the glittering tech campuses and political fundraisers, in a place where a young boy's mind was first shaped by international displacement and strategic thinking. Every transformative figure emerges from a specific historical and personal context, and for Peter Andreas Thiel, born in Frankfurt am Main on the 11th of October 1967, that context would prove extraordinarily formative. The child of Klaus Friedrich and Suzanne Thiel, his early years were marked by a pattern of displacement that would fundamentally shape his understanding of institutional systems and their malleability. When Peter was 1 year old, the family began their transformative journey across the Atlantic, settling first in Cleveland, Ohio. Klaus's work as a chemical engineer in various mining companies created an inherently nomadic existence, with young Peter and his younger brother Patrick Michael experiencing the kind of institutional fluidity that often breeds either adaptation or resistance. In Thiel's case, it would eventually produce both. The family's sojourn in South Africa and Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia, exposed Thiel to stark institutional contrasts at a formative age. His experience at a Swakopmund school, with its mandatory uniforms and corporal punishment, provided an early education in institutional power dynamics. The practice of striking students' hands with rulers served as a visceral lesson in authoritarian control, one that would later fuel his philosophical resistance to uniformity and regimentation. Yet amid these dislocations, Thiel found sanctuary in realms of structured imagination. His deep engagement with Dungeons and Dragons and science fiction, particularly the works of Isaac Asimov and Robert A. Heinlein, offered alternative models of world-building. His profound connection to J.R.R. Tolkien's mythology, so deep that he would later name 6 of his companies, including Palantir Technologies and Mithril Capital, after elements from Middle-earth, suggested an early understanding of how narrative frameworks could shape reality. The family's 1977 settlement in Foster City, California, itself a testament to engineered possibility, built on reclaimed land from San Francisco Bay, marked a crucial stabilization. Here, Thiel's exceptional intellectual capabilities found fertile ground. His victory in a California-wide mathematics competition while at Bowditch Middle School signaled not just academic prowess, but a mind attuned to systematic thinking. At San Mateo High School, Thiel's intellectual framework began to crystallize. His engagement with Ayn Rand's philosophy coincided with his admiration for Reagan-era optimism and anti-communism, creating a distinctive fusion of libertarian thought and technological possibility. His selection as valedictorian of the class of 1985 marked not just academic achievement, but the emergence of a systematic worldview. The Stanford years proved decisive in unexpected ways. As an undergraduate, Thiel encountered René Girard, whose mimetic theory of human desire and competition would profoundly influence his understanding of social dynamics. When the university moved to replace its Western culture program with a culture, ideas and values course emphasizing diversity, Thiel responded by co-founding the Stanford Review in 1987. This conservative and libertarian newspaper, supported by Irving Kristol's funding, became his first exercise in institutional counter-programming. After completing his undergraduate studies in 1989, Thiel proceeded to Stanford Law School, graduating in 1992. However, the seeds of institutional critique planted during his undergraduate years, particularly through his intellectual engagement with Girard and his experience founding the Review, had already begun to germinate into something more profound, a systematic approach to understanding and reshaping institutional power. These varied influences, displacement, philosophical exploration, mathematical precision, strategic gaming, and mimetic theory, were coalescing into a unique analytical framework. The question that would drive the next phase of his life was clear. How could these theoretical insights be transformed into practical tools for institutional change? The path from institutional conformity to revolutionary change often begins with a moment of clarity. For Peter Thiel, that moment came in 1992, when his brief tenure at Sullivan and Cromwell revealed the stifling nature of corporate law's rigid hierarchies. Yet this wasn't merely a career pivot. It was the first step in a calculated transformation that would reshape the landscape of digital finance. After departing law, Thiel's journey led him to Credit Suisse, where he worked as a derivatives trader while moonlighting as a speechwriter for former United States Secretary of Education William Bennett. However, even Wall Street's frenetic energy couldn't contain his expanding vision. Therefore, in 1996, he returned to California, where the emerging dot-com boom offered fertile ground for systemic disruption. With financial backing from friends and family, Thiel raised $1 million to establish Thiel Capital Management. His first venture capital setback came quickly, a $100,000 investment in friend Luke Nosek's failed web-based calendar project. Yet this temporary defeat led to a fateful introduction when Nosek's friend Max Levchin presented his cryptography-related concept, which would eventually become their joint venture, Confinity, in 1998. Confinity's initial focus on handheld device security soon evolved into something far more ambitious. Thiel recognized a critical gap in the digital payments landscape. While credit cards and ATM networks were expanding, many merchants lacked the necessary hardware for card transactions. This limitation forced consumers to rely on cash or checks, creating an opportunity for revolutionary change. The company's transformation into PayPal represented more than a mere pivot. It embodied Thiel's vision of liberation through technology. His vision thus extended beyond mere convenience, targeting the very foundations of state-controlled currency. The merger with Elon Musk's X.com, well prior to the modern Twitter to X.com transition, in 2000, accelerated this transformation, followed by strategic combinations with companies like Pixo, which expanded PayPal's reach into mobile commerce. The company's February 2002 IPO culminated in a $1.5 billion acquisition by eBay later that year, with Thiel serving as CEO throughout. His 3.7% stake translated to $55 million, but the true value lay in the network of innovators that would emerge from this crucible. The PayPal Mafia, as this network came to be known, would go on to found or lead transformative companies including Tesla, SpaceX, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thiel's role as the Don of this influential group positioned him perfectly for his next revolutionary move. In 2004, his prescient $500,000 investment in Facebook for a 10.2% stake would multiply into billions, establishing him as Silicon Valley's most visionary investor. As Thiel's influence grew through ventures like Founders Fund and Palantir Technologies, a larger pattern emerged, one where technological innovations served as a vehicle for deeper institutional change. The question now wasn't just about building successful companies, but about reshaping the very foundations of economic and political power. Now, in the disorienting aftermath of 9/11, as America grappled with questions of security and surveillance, Peter Thiel would conceive something more ambitious than mere technological innovation. He envisioned an alternative power structure that would operate in the spaces between government authority and private enterprise. Palantir Technologies, founded in 2003, emerged not just as a company, but as an instrument of institutional infiltration. Its name drawn from Tolkien's all-seeing stones, serving as an almost prophetic gesture toward its future reach. While Silicon Valley's established powers initially dismissed the venture, with Sequoia Capital's chairman Michael Moritz doodling through their pitch meeting, this rejection merely reinforced Thiel's conviction that true power lay in operating outside conventional channels. The CIA's venture arm, In-Q-Tel, proved more prescient, providing $2 million in early funding. Thiel, understanding the stakes, committed $30 million of his own capital, positioning Palantir at the intersection of state power and private enterprise. The company's evolution over 3 years of development revealed Thiel's deeper strategy. Rather than pursuing pure artificial intelligence, Palantir proposed intelligence augmentation, a methodology that would embed human analysts within vast data networks. This approach wasn't merely technical. It represented a new philosophy of power, one that would ultimately blur the lines between corporate interests and state surveillance. Palantir's first major demonstrations of power came through the exposure of Chinese cyber espionage networks, GhostNet and Shadow Network in 2009 and 2010. These revelations, while positioned as security triumphs, also showcased Palantir's ability to operate as a quasi-state actor, conducting international intelligence operations outside traditional governmental frameworks. By 2014, with Thiel as the largest shareholder, Palantir had evolved into something unprecedented, a private entity with deep access to governmental data systems, its tentacles extending from counter-terrorism to healthcare analytics. The COVID-19 pandemic further cemented this position, with Palantir's Tiberius system managing vaccine distribution, demonstrating how private power could become indispensable to public function. The company's 2020 public listing and subsequent inclusion in the S&P 500 by 2024 masked a more significant transformation, the emergence of what critics termed a shadow state, where Palantir's algorithms increasingly guided government decisions, from military operations to immigration enforcement. The company's support of Ukraine's military efforts and its expanding AI platforms further blurred the lines between corporate and state power. Today, Palantir stands as the cornerstone of what some observers describe as Thiel's counter-elite strategy, the creation of parallel power structures that operate alongside and increasingly supersede traditional institutional authorities. Through this lens, Palantir represents not just a successful company, but a new model of power projection, one where private entities possess capabilities once reserved for nation-states. Yet, Thiel's institutional influence extends far beyond Palantir's digital dominion into the realm of direct political power, most notably through his protégé and soon-to-be Vice President J.D. Vance. Their relationship, which began when Vance attended a Thiel speech at Yale Law School in 2011, evolved from mentorship to a powerful alliance that would reshape American political dynamics. Thiel's guidance took Vance from aspiring lawyer to venture capitalist at Mithril Capital, and eventually to establishing his own firm, Naria Capital, with Thiel's backing. The transformation from business partnership to political powerhouse accelerated when Thiel orchestrated a crucial meeting between Vance and Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago in 2021. This strategic introduction, combined with Thiel's unprecedented $15 million support for Vance's Senate campaign, demonstrated how private wealth could be leveraged to create new political realities. Their shared investments in alternative platforms like Rumble further illustrated their vision of building parallel institutions to challenge established power structures. Now, with Vance's ascension to the vice presidency, Thiel's influence has achieved a new dimension of institutional authority. This mentor-protégé relationship represents more than personal success. It embodies a sophisticated strategy of power projection, where private sector wealth, technological dominance, and direct political authority converge to form what some observers call a new kind of American power elite, operating simultaneously within and beyond traditional governmental structures. And yet, a connection with the incoming vice president is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Peter Thiel's growing power. In the evolving narrative of American political technological power, 2016 marked a decisive turning point. While Silicon Valley's elite largely recoiled from Donald Trump's presidential bid, Peter Thiel orchestrated a dramatic departure from this orthodoxy. His appearance at the Republican National Convention wasn't merely notable for its contrarian stance. As the first openly gay speaker to address the RNC from the main stage, Thiel demonstrated his characteristic willingness to transcend conventional political categorizations. Thiel's political evolution reflected a deeper transformation in his understanding of institutional change. As a self-described conservative libertarian, his journey led him toward national conservatism by the late 2010s, marking a significant shift from his earlier pure libertarian stance. This ideological evolution manifested in October 2016 through a $1.25 million donation to Trump's campaign. The aftermath of Trump's victory saw Thiel's influence expand dramatically, earning him a position on the executive committee of the president-elect's transition team. However, it was during the 2022 election cycle that his political investments reached unprecedented scale. His contributions included the aforementioned $15 million to J.D. Vance's Ohio Senate campaign and $10 million to Blake Masters' Arizona bid, both tech investors who had previously worked in Thiel's orbit. By February 2022, his total contributions to Republican candidates had surpassed $20.4 million, with particular support for those who questioned the 2020 election results. Yet by 2023, a subtle shift emerged. In an interview with The Atlantic's Barton Gellman, Thiel revealed he had lost interest in democracy and wouldn't be financing any candidates in the next presidential campaign, including Trump. This evolution in political strategy coincided with the establishment of his own political action committee, Free Forever, focused on border control, restrictive immigration policy, and anti-interventionist foreign policy. Throughout this period, Thiel maintained his technological power base through Palantir, and, through Founders Fund, he maintained substantial positions in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and defense technology, sectors that increasingly shaped national security discussions. In 2017, his early investment in Clearview AI, a controversial facial recognition startup, demonstrated his continued willingness to back transformative yet contentious technologies. This fusion of technological innovation and political influence created a new model of power projection in American politics. While many Silicon Valley figures carefully separated their technical and political activities, Thiel demonstrated how technological expertise could be explicitly leveraged for political impact, fundamentally reshaping the relationship between Silicon Valley and conservative politics. Yet by 2024, Peter Thiel's trajectory would present a fascinating study in institutional influence and strategic adaptation. With an estimated net worth of $11.2 billion according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, Thiel's recent maneuvers suggest not so much a retreat as a calculated recalibration of how power is best wielded in an increasingly complex technological landscape. And this evolution becomes particularly evident through his philanthropic initiatives, which reveal a consistent focus on systemic change rather than traditional political influence. The Thiel Fellowship, offering $100,000 grants to young innovators willing to forego traditional education, represents a direct challenge to established academic institutions. And his philosophical evolution extends beyond mere supposed political disengagement. Through the Thiel Foundation's various initiatives, including breakout labs and its support for artificial intelligence research, he has maintained his commitment to transformative technologies while shifting away from direct political advocacy. His early backing of OpenAI and substantial contributions to life extension research through the Methuselah Mouse Prize Foundation, over $7 million as of 2017, demonstrate this persistent focus on technological solutions to societal challenges. The geographic diversification of his assets further illuminates this strategic shift. Beyond his San Francisco residence, Thiel's acquisition of New Zealand citizenship in 2011 and his 193-hectare estate near Wanaka, classified as sensitive land, suggest a global perspective on institutional influence. This international positioning, combined with his deep ties to various government agencies through Palantir Technologies, which began with CIA venture capital backing, reflects a sophisticated understanding of power projection in the digital age. Yet perhaps most revealing is his evolving approach to political engagement. In a 2023 interview with The Atlantic, Thiel expressed his disillusionment with democratic processes, announcing his withdrawal from political funding for the 2024 presidential campaign. This shift coincides with the establishment of Free Forever, his political action committee focused on specific policy objectives rather than individual candidates. Through Founders Fund and Mithril Capital, named after Tolkien's fictional metal, reflecting Thiel's enduring appreciation for mythological frameworks, he maintains significant influence in shaping technological development. His prescient recognition of cryptocurrency's disruptive potential, marked by Founders Fund's calculated entry into Bitcoin in 2017, reveals a pattern more unsettling than mere market insight. Each investment appears as another piece in an elaborate chess game, where the stakes extend far beyond financial returns to the very architecture of social control. As America wrestles with unprecedented technological disruption, Thiel's strategic withdrawal from public view masks a more sophisticated form of influence. His evolution from PayPal revolutionary to political kingmaker and back to technological puppet master demonstrates not just the fluid nature of power, but also its possible consolidation into ever more subtle and unaccountable forms. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. How familiar were you with Peter Thiel before this video? And what is your opinion of him? We can't wait to hear from you, and thanks again for joining us for another episode of Old Money Luxury. And cheers, until next time.
Donald Trump has said over and over again, the U.S. is subsidizing Canada.
We are subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year.
The United States is subsidizing Canada.
As I called him, Governor Trudeau, I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you? Because we give them a lot of money. It's very unfair.
But what does Trump mean exactly? Subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. And is it true? We should start by saying that everyone is partly guessing what Trump means when he talks about the U.S. subsidizing Canada, because he hasn't actually explained where he's getting this $100 billion number from. And the number sometimes changes with a whole bunch of other grievances getting thrown into the pot.
Why are we supporting a country, $200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state.
But let's pick up on what appears, at least most of the time, to be driving this claim about the US subsidizing Canada, and that's the trade imbalance between the two countries.
Donald Trump has always been obsessed with trade balances, trade surpluses and deficits, and the fact that the U.S. has a trade deficit.
We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits.
A trade deficit happens when country A imports more from country B than it exports. And Trump's right on one central point. The U.S. does have an ongoing trade deficit with Canada. And that's been the case for years. Canada has, in fact, sold more goods to the United States than the U.S. has sold to Canada. And zooming in on 2023, for example, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the hard numbers are pretty clear. Canada exported $427 billion worth of goods to the U.S., while the U.S. exported $355 billion worth of goods to Canada. The difference between those two numbers, about 72 billion US, or about 100 billion Canadian.
He talks about, I'm a trader, I love trade, I want so much trade, but it has to be fair. But what he means by fair is that if the US has a surplus, it's fair. If the US has a deficit, it's unfair.
So maybe that's where Trump is getting this $100 billion figure from. Except if that's the case, it's misleading. Because what I just showed you was the trade deficit in goods, physical things. But think of all the other things that Americans sell to Canadians, from financial services, telecommunications, air transport, consulting, hell, even Netflix.
It's very important to look at services as well, because services has been a growing part of trade for many decades now.
Yes, any honest accounting of a trade imbalance must take services into account, because that's trade. And when you look at that balance sheet in services, the US actually has a surplus over Canada of about $32 billion US, which doesn't wipe out the deficit in goods, but it certainly pulls the two countries a little closer together. The actual total trade imbalance between Canada and the US is about $40 billion US, or 57 billion Canadian, in Canada's favor. But let's set aside the number, because like I said at the start, I don't know if it's clear to anyone where Trump is getting his numbers from, because he hasn't explained it, even when asked. But there is a bigger question here about how Trump appears to be framing the trade imbalance as some sort of subsidy to Canada.
And so I think what he's saying implicitly, we're giving more dollars to Canada than they're spending in the U.S. And he thinks that's a subsidy.
He's just saying the very fact that there's a trade deficit shows that we must be subsidizing things in some fashion. And that's not the case.
Right, because when we think of subsidies, we tend to think of handouts, right? Except it's not like the US is just sending Canada $40 billion a year for nothing in return. Like when I buy a $6 jar of mayonnaise from Walmart, that's not a subsidy. I'm buying mayonnaise. And Americans are simply buying more from Canada than Canadians buy from Americans. And experts we spoke to say that's not necessarily a bad thing.
There's nothing inherently good or bad about a trade surplus or a deficit. The United States has had a trade deficit pretty much since the end of the Second World War. Why is that? Because they're richer than any other country, so they buy more stuff.
And consider this, the US's $40 billion trade deficit with Canada pales in comparison to its trade deficit with many other countries. Just look at how much more the US buys from China each year, for example. That gap is more than $250 billion.
So Canada only accounts for about 5% of the overall U.S. deficit just in terms of traded goods. It's not even in the top 5 countries that have a larger surplus.
But let's go one level deeper with Trump's argument, because what he's actually been trying to get across is that the U.S. doesn't actually need any of the stuff it's buying from Canada, and that it's only been buying Canadian products to essentially help Canada out. That's the subsidy.
We're doing it because of habit, and we're doing it because we like our neighbors, and we've been good neighbors. But we can't do it forever. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit.
And it's not just cars. It's also
lumber. We have massive fields of lumber. We don't need their dairy products. We have more than they have. We don't need anything.
So now we're starting to understand his point, that he believes the U.S. can and should produce all of these things domestically instead of paying Canada for them.
The America First movement, not just Trump, but the America First movement and the economists who are part of it are fixated on the deficit as synonymous with job loss in the U.S.
And that's certainly an argument you can make from industry to industry. If you set aside the notion that the whole reason you buy things instead of make things is because making things is often more expensive. But if Trump really believes that the U.S. buys too much from Canada, he is leaving one big thing out. The one daily purchase that makes up about a quarter of everything Americans buy from Canadians. The U.S. produces more crude oil than any other country in the world, around 13 million barrels a day. But for its own citizens, it needs more than that, about 20 million barrels a day. And it can't even efficiently use a big chunk of what it does produce, because historically, American refineries have been set up to process a different, heavier kind of oil than American drillers can find in their own shale deposits. So that's an expensive problem. But you know who produces exactly the kind of heavy crude oil America needs? You guessed it. The U.S. buys the majority, around 60% of the crude oil it needs from Canada. And on some level, it makes sense. Canada is a relatively stable energy partner. Pipelines make transporting oil a lot easier.
Because of the distance, because of pre-existing supply chain links, because of transportation routes. This is why Canada and the U.S. trade the most.
And one other way to look at Canada's trade surplus.
If you remove oil, we're now running a trade deficit with the United States.
It's largely one commodity in our case. And that commodity is not putting Americans out of work. It's putting Americans to work.
Putting Americans to work because of what I just mentioned a few moments ago, that there is an entire industry built around the importation of heavy Canadian crude and all the American workers who process and refine that oil domestically.
Oil and gas is probably one of the best examples of how something that is responsible for a huge trade deficit is actually creating tens of thousands of jobs in the U.S.
Now, Trump has signaled that he intends to ramp up domestic drilling, too. But to use all of that oil domestically, there would have to be a significant and expensive retooling of America's refining capacity as well. That doesn't happen overnight. So in the meantime, Americans buy a ton of oil from Canada. And that is the single biggest driver of the trade deficit that Donald Trump says is a big, big problem.
If it were to be interrupted, I know it would harm Canada, but it also would get the attention, I think, of U.S. policymakers because there are parts of and regions of the U.S. that very much depend on those imports.
So, yes, the U.S. has a trade imbalance with Canada. No, that doesn't mean the U.S. is subsidizing Canada's economy. But yes, Trump can and will likely continue to argue that it should be buying less from Canada and producing more at home. How easy that is to actually do is one question. Another is how much of all of this is just part of one long, dramatic negotiation. Donald Trump may not have intended to stir up a new election issue here in Canada, but since he threatened a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods if
Okay, everybody. Now, if you've seen that I've been talking about the North American Union, I will be coming back later on, possibly in about an hour from now, to discuss exactly what needs to be done in Canada and why they're talking about economic talks between Canada and the U.S. Well, this is in regards to the North American Union that was fully launched in 2008. And all of our natural resources, bringing Canada, U.S., and Mexico together, there would be one central bank, which is what is going to be controlling the the CBDC, as you know, and that all our Canada's natural resources will be collateral for this bank. So again, you have to go back in time to 2008 and remember what was being talked about, the Security Prosperity Partnership agreements, all of this stuff. So the people now might not even remember this, but it's important, and we'll come back to you with that. I'll be coming on live in about an hour or so. So please stay tuned and stay with us and stay educated, because if you don't know who the players are, you don't know what hit you. And this is what we need to stop. So anything that will ever make sense to Canadian citizens and protect our children and their future and our natural resources in this country is to replace the head of state with the people. And I'll explain exactly what that means in the next session. So see you then. Thanks. Bye-bye.